Daily Brief Canadian Macro with your host, Steve.
Welcome back to the Daily Brief Canadian Macro. I'm Steve. Canada is spending over $1 billion to host 13 soccer games. FIFA says we'll get nearly $4 billion back. However, 12 of the last 14 World Cup hosts lost money. Today we're asking the question nobody at FIFA wants asked out loud. Does hosting the World Cup actually pay off? Or are taxpayers just covering the deposit on someone else's party? We're working from the Parliamentary Budget Officer's new cost report, the Globe and Mail's host city investigation, and decades of research from sports economists Andrew Zimbalist, Victor Matheson, and Robert Baade. We'll be looking at what Canada is spending and what we're promised in return, what actually happened the last 14 times this promise was made, and how the World Cup stacks up against the Olympics and Expo. Let's get into it. Hosting 13 World Cup games in Toronto and Vancouver will cost Canadian taxpayers an estimated $1.1 billion, according to the Parliamentary Budget Officer. $473 million from Ottawa, the rest split between the provinces and the two cities. Toronto's tab is $380 million for 6 games. Vancouver's could top $578 million for 7 games. That works out to about $82 million per game. Now here's the more interesting number. On a per-game basis, Canada is actually spending less than recent hosts. Brazil paid roughly $91 million per game in 2014, and Russia paid about $80 million in 2018. Canada's lower bill comes down to one decision: reusing existing stadiums instead of building new ones. BMO Field got a $146 million renovation, and BC Place got a $196 million upgrade. Expensive, but cheaper than starting from scratch. So what's the payoff? FIFA's own estimate puts Canada's economic benefit at $3.8 billion, $2 billion in GDP, $1.3 billion in labor income, and 24,000 jobs. Independent analysts are already discounting that number, and even taken at face value, $3.8 billion is under 0.5% of Canada's GDP. For the US, whose economy is 20 times larger, FIFA's $17 billion projection works out to less than 0.1%, a rounding error. Mexico, though, with a smaller, more tourism-dependent economy, stands to feel it the most. So here's the track record. According to the analysis of every World Cup since 1966, 12 of the last 14 tournaments lost money for their host countries. The last 3 averaged a negative return on investment of 31%. This isn't a new finding. Economists have been documenting it for decades. A study of the 1974 World Cup in Germany found no measurable bump in employment, short or long term. When the U.S. hosted in '94, economists Robert Baade and Victor Matheson found the actual economic impact came in $5.5 to $9.3 billion short of what had been promised before the tournament. And research tracking GDP across every World Cup since 1982 finds hosting produces a bump that's technically positive but statistically meaningless. In the long run, it's close to zero. University of Maryland economist Dennis Cotes put it bluntly: FIFA collects the revenue and host countries are left holding the bill. Then there's what gets left behind. Qatar spent $220 billion on the 2022 tournament, more than 15 times what Russia spent 4 years earlier, and the most expensive in World Cup history. South Africa's $600 million Cape Town stadium now costs roughly $3.5 million a year just to maintain. Brazil's $550 million stadium in Brasilia once hosted a match in front of just 400 people. These aren't legacy projects, they're maintenance bills with a soccer pitch attached. If we widen the lens a little, a 2024 Oxford study found the average Olympics cost roughly triple its original bid, with 15 of the last 19 games running more than 50% over budget. Montreal's 76 Olympics is still the worst on record, a 720% cost overrun. It took the Canadian government 30 years until 2006 to pay off that debt. Athens did it again in 2004. 21 of 22 venues built for those games sat abandoned within a few years. The only Olympics to actually turn a profit in the modern era is also the only one that reused existing venues and ran almost entirely on private money. Los Angeles 1984 with a $215 million surplus. Now compare that to Canada's own World Fairs. Expo 67 in Montreal cost $283 million, and economists found it returned almost double that to taxpayers in tourist revenue alone. One of the cleanest wins in Canadian event history. In comparison, Expo 86 in Vancouver blew past its original $80 million budget tenfold and ran a $311 million deficit. but it is credited with adding $3.7 billion to the wider economy and left Vancouver with the SkyTrain it still runs on. The pattern holds across all three formats. Reuse what already exists, keep the funding private where you can, and the numbers tend to work. Build new monuments on the public's credit card and you get Montreal 76, Qatar 2022, or Athens 04. So where does that leave Canada's bet on World Cup 2026? Three things matter more than the headline cost. 1. Canada's approach. Reusing BMO Field and BC Place instead of building new stadiums puts it closer to the Expo 67 model than the Montreal 76 one. That's the right instinct even if the bill is still public. 2. The size of the host economy decides whether anyone will ever notice the bump. A benefit that would be transformative for Mexico is statistically invisible in an economy as large as the United States, and even Canada's own best case estimate is well under 0.5% of GDP. 3. Nobody will actually know the real numbers for years. Vancouver and Toronto have both said the final reconciled costs and benefits won't be public until spring 2027. Bottom line, the real question isn't whether hosting the World Cup is fun, it's whether taxpayers should be the ones underwriting FIFA's bet that this time it pays off. Well, that's the end of today's episode. Thanks for watching the Daily Brief. This was the Daily Brief original. You can find our sources in the description below. If you found this content helpful, please subscribe, hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next brief, and don't hesitate to comment if there's a creator or topic you'd like us to cover here. I'm Steve, as always. Nothing here is financial advice. Everyone's situation is different, so please do your own research and talk to a qualified financial advisor before making any investment decisions. Good night.